I want to start today with a question. And I'm going to ask you to actually stay with it rather than reaching for that quick answer. Give it a few seconds before your brain tries to wrap it up neatly or you try to answer it in how you think people want you to, how you think will protect someone. But I want to ask you who is it that taught you needing people was a weakness, right? Who taught you that needing people was a weakness? Let's take a breath together. Let that land. Because for a lot of us, the answer to that question is key to understanding why we are the way we are, why we self isolate, why we overfunction, why we can show up for everyone and ask nothing in return, why we can give generously and endlessly and still somehow feel completely, devastatingly alone in a room full of people who care about us. And here's the thing, most of the time, nobody said it directly to you. Like, you weren't 4 years old and somebody sat you down on a couch and delivered a speech about how vulnerability is for suckers and self-sufficiency is the highest value. And if you did, I'm sorry. But for most of us, that's not the case. Like, instead for us, life said it instead. Your emotionally unavailable parent, they said it through their absence. The friend who disappeared the moment you needed something, they said it. The church that celebrated your service and went quiet when you were suffering said it. The relationship that ended right after you finally told the truth about what you needed, that said it clearly. And the entire American cultural machine, the one that produces hustle culture podcasts, LinkedIn posts about 5 a.m. routines, says it every single day to you. It says to be independent, handle your own business, grind harder, need less, want less, and ask for nothing in return. And see, here's what I've been thinking about. If you live under those lessons long enough, self-protection starts to feel like maturity. And isolation, it starts to look like wisdom. That armor, that ego armor you've built for yourself starts to feel like your own skin. And the wound that's been sitting there for all those years, it gets so familiar that you start to call it your personality. But friends, a wound that became a habit is still a wound. And the walls that protected you back then, they can be imprisoning you right now. So that's what we're going to get into today. I'm your host, Reverend Andrew Shipley of Missiongathering Christian Church, Disciples of Christ. This is our podcast. We are in the Rise Up series. This is episode 5. And today we're talking about what it actually means to belong to each other. So let's go. So in Acts chapter 2, right? The second chapter of Acts. You've heard it before. You might not know you heard it. But it's one of those quoted texts in the history of Christian community building and church life. But it's also one of the least followed texts in Christian history. Everybody loves to read it, right? And almost nobody does what it says. So I want to read it to you slowly and with fresh ears. The believers devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, to the community, to their shared meals, and to their prayers. A sense of awe came over everyone. All believers were united in sharing everything. They would sell pieces of property and possessions and distribute the proceeds to everyone who needed them. Every day they met together and ate in their homes. They shared food with gladness and simplicity. They praised God and demonstrated God's goodness to everyone. Now, notice what the author of Luke and Acts thinks is worth recording about the very first Christian community. They don't write down the doctrinal statements. They're not talking about the membership requirements. There's no org chart or statement of faith or branding strategy. What gets recorded, what's important, is this: they learned together, they prayed together, they ate together, they shared resources, they noticed when someone had a need, they met in humble spaces, and they practiced joy. There's no celebrity platform, no church growth strategy, just people refusing to let one another disappear. It sounds so simple, right? But if you've ever been in community, you know it's not simple. So don't let the familiarity of this text make you think that it's easy. To actually refuse to let people disappear, to genuinely see people notice needs, share resources, show up in a culture that is engineering isolation at an industrial scale, that's not easy. That is an act of profound resistance. And to me, that's the gospel with skin put on and walking around. I think we've let this text become decorative, right? We've read it so many times, we've stopped hearing how hard it is. So let's slow down and really sit inside it. I want to say something that might feel a little uncomfortable at first because I don't know where you're coming from with this. But community is always political. It's not partisan. I want to be clear about that. It's a clear distinction. Political in the original sense of having to do with how power works, who holds it, and what they do with it. So, in the horror of the Holocaust and everything leading up to World War II, the German Jewish philosopher Hannah Arendt escaped Nazi Germany with her life. And she spent the rest of her days trying to understand how that fascism took root and how fascism can still take root and grow. She wrote something I find myself returning to constantly. She argued that it wasn't poverty or ignorance or even violence that creates the most fertile conditions for totalitarianism. She argued that it was loneliness because isolated people are easier to manipulate. They're more susceptible to simple and brutal narratives. They're more likely to surrender freedom in exchange for belonging, even belonging to something that will eventually and ultimately consume them. She had watched this happen in real time, and she was writing from inside the evidence, inside the lived experience. Some of us can see that we're living inside some of that experience. And what does empire do? Every empire, ancient and modern, the first strategy of domination, Caesar said it himself, is to fragment people, to divide and conquer, keep them suspicious of each other, keep them competing for the scraps that you'll give them, keep them exhausted that they can't organize any genuine care, any solidarity. Divide by race, by class, by sexuality, by politics. Keep them scrolling alone in dark rooms, consuming content engineered to make them angry at each other so they never look up long enough. Never look up long enough to ask who's actually profiting from all this. Empire runs on fragmentation, which means pay close attention here. Community is not just nice. I'm going to say that again. It means that community is not just nice. Community is not just sentiment. In a world that wants to fragment and isolate you, community is resistance. When people genuinely know each other, not algorithm curated, not a highlight reel, know each other, right? Literally know each other, really know each other. But when they actually know each other, when they sit at real tables together, when they share resources and meals, and they tell the truth about what's going on in their lives, and they refuse to let others disappear. The systems of domination that have controlled us for so long, that created the settler colonial hellscape that we live in, those systems of domination, they lose their grip. They can't hold on to you. The early church wasn't just spiritually beautiful. The early church was structurally threatening to empire. The Roman Empire didn't persecute Christians, the early Christians, because of theological disagreement. They persecuted them because a community of people sharing resources across class lines, calling each other brother and sister across ethnic lines, refusing to participate in the cult of empire and its violence, that was dangerous. And it should still be dangerous. A church that poses no threat whatsoever to the powers of this world, that means they've made peace with those powers, with those principalities, and that peace always comes at a price paid by the most vulnerable people in the room. So when I talk about community, I'm not talking about being friendly or having a good welcome team. I'm talking about the kind of togetherness that costs you something. It requires something of you, that actually changes how we hold power, money, and time. That's what Acts 2 is describing. And it's genuinely hard. The text says that they distributed to anyone who had need. And I want to sit with that economic reality for a moment, right? Because the text is doing something genuinely radical, and we've domesticated it into something safe and manageable. That thing we've domesticated it into, we call that charity. And charity and mutuality are not the same thing. Charity, and I want to be clear, right? I'm not against charity. It feeds people, it pays rent, it makes people be able to get to the next day. It matters. But charity, right? Charity preserves the power differential. Charity says, I have and you lack. I will help you from up here and you will stay down there. I will decide what you need. I will give on my own terms. I will feel good about it and you will be appropriately grateful for it. The giver stays comfortable, right? The giver in charity stays powerful. And the structure that created the need in the first place goes completely unexamined by the person who gave. Dean Spade, who's a legal scholar and activist, one of the most important voices writing about mutual aid today, says that real care happens when communities understand that everyone will sometimes need help and everyone has something to give. Everyone, not the successful helping the struggling from a comfortable distance, not the strong carrying the weak. Everyone sometimes is the one who needs. Everyone sometimes is the one who gives. And everyone, yes, everyone, let me say it again, everyone brings something to the table. That's the Imago Dei, the image of God that we bear within ourselves made practical. If every person bears the image of God, then every person brings something that the community needs. Not just the productive ones in your community, not just the healthy ones, not just the ones who have it all together right now. Friend, in some seasons, you'll be the one bringing the bread. And in some seasons, you're the one who's going to need the bread. In some seasons, you'll drive, and in some seasons, you'll need a ride from someone. In some seasons, you're the one with a good therapist number, and other seasons, you need that number to be handed to you. There will be seasons where you have an extra room, and there will be seasons where you need a place to land. I wanna say this clearly as I can, right? Being the one who needs something, that's not weakness. It isn't weakness. It's not a moral failing. That's what being human actually looks like. And the system that taught you that needing help was a weakness was lying to you the whole time and lying strategically. Remember? Because isolated people don't organize. Isolated people don't challenge anything. Isolated people are manageable. The rugged individualist myth that this country has, the bootstrap theology, the self made man fantasy, the John Wayne BS. All of it was constructed to make you ashamed of your own humanity. So you would never reach for the hand of the person next to you and realize that together you have more power than you've been led to believe. So Acts 2, taken seriously, is the antidote. The antidote's not charity, it's mutuality. It's not pity, it's solidarity. It's not rescuing in some form of white saviorism, it's belonging. It seems so simple. They broke bread together, and so many things happen. And I don't want to rush past that act because I think the meal in this passage is doing more theologically than we usually give it credit for, right? Because think about this, meals are not efficient, right? In a culture obsessed with optimization, where we eat standing at a counter or scrolling through our phones or in the car between commitments, meals are almost countercultural today. Countercultural within themselves because meals, right? A shared meal, you have to slow down. You cannot eat fast and genuinely be present at the same time. Did you know that something in your nervous system relaxes when you share food with someone? Something ancient and deep time stuff happens. Like, y'all, we're creatures, right? Created beings, evolved, learned to trust around fires and tables long before we had language for it. And meals create a memory in a way that nothing else does. Right? You might not remember the argument that you got into, but you'll remember the table. You remember who was there, who brought what, that one story someone told that made everyone cry, laugh, right? The person who just cracks everybody up. Meals also, they level everyone's status. I want to be careful, like not completely, not permanently, but temporarily. At the table, once you dig in, your title pauses, your productivity pauses, your output becomes irrelevant. You're just a person eating with other people. I think for in that moment, maybe just that moment, you let yourself be that. I think that's why Jesus built so much of his ministry around tables, right? He ate with the Pharisees, who were the liberals of his time. He ate with the tax collectors and the sex workers and the lepers. He fed crowds on hillsides. His last act before his death was a meal with his friends. His first resurrection appearance in Luke is at the table in Emmaus. That's when they finally recognize who he is. Peter is reconciled at a campfire meal next to the sea. Jesus kept showing up at tables because Jesus understood something that our efficiency obsessed churches and culture have mostly forgotten, that time taken to have a meal at a table can teach what sermons cannot, what Bible studies can't even touch. And I want to say something tender here because I think it's true for more people than who will admit it. Some of you in this room have never doubted God as much as you've doubted whether people could ever really be safe, right? You haven't doubted whether God is safe. You've doubted whether people can be safe. Your theology is mostly intact. Your Christology is fine. You can argue the reliability of the gospels and the things that you believe, but people have hurt you. People have taken your trust and done something terrible with it. And so the wound that you're carrying isn't really theological. The wound that you're carrying is relational. And to be completely honest with you, no sermon is going to fix that for you. But a trustworthy table with a shared meal might start to. A meal where nobody performs, where someone asks how you're really doing, and then actually waits for the real answer. That in a way can become its own embodied theology. That can become the place where the resurrection stops being a doctrine that you defend and starts being a reality that you've tasted within yourself. Let me get specific for a minute because I've been talking about community in the abstract. I want to bring it a little closer. I know people, maybe you do, who know exactly how to be useful in community, but have no idea how to be vulnerable in it. These are the people who show up early and stay late, who organize the event and coordinate the details, who carry the chairs and remember everyone's name and bring the food and serve beautifully. But let someone ask how they're actually doing, how they're really doing, and they become smoke, poof, disappeared. They'll say, "Oh, I'm fine. No, really don't worry about me." And then they redirect the conversation back to someone else's need because someone else's need is safe. Someone else's need keeps them in the helper role, keeps them in the spotlight away from the thing they cannot talk about. The psychoanalyst Alice Miller wrote about the drama of the gifted child, right? The child who learned so early that love was available for performance and acceptance was available for competence. That they became this extraordinarily good child at meeting everyone's needs while losing all contact with their own interior life. That child grows up and becomes the person who helps everyone, right? Because helping is the only way they know to stay in the room without actually being seen because their wound has become their personality. Friend, you can be in community without being in community. The service that kept you present can keep you in that community, can sustain you a little bit, but the vulnerability that you need to actually be there, to be in community, to show up, to be here now, that vulnerability would require something more of you. I also know people who left communities that hurt them badly, and maybe this is you. They hurt them badly and genuinely. The church told them that they were too much. The community that ch- chose the institution over the person who had been harmed. The small group that prayed for them on Wednesday and excluded them by Friday. And now every invitation they receive, maybe that you receive, feels like a setup. Every extended hand looks like the last one, the one that pulled back right when you needed it most. So every new community is just the old community with different furniture. So people in this category, they stay on the edges, right? Close enough to feel less alone, but far enough to stay protected. And here's the thing, I'm not going to tell you that's wrong. Protection made sense, and protection might still make sense. Protection kept you alive, and we're glad for that. But I want to say something carefully and clearly. Protection is not the same thing as belonging. Surviving is not the same thing as living. And sometimes the walls you built for good reasons may be costing you something that you cannot keep paying. Somewhere underneath the false self, the protective identity we construct to get through the environments that couldn't handle our real identity or would harm that. Underneath all that, the true self is still there, still waiting for a space safe enough to emerge. That person in you, that person deserves a table. That person deserves a community patient and steady enough to wait. Here's something the broader church is going to have to sit down and actually reckon with. And I want to say it plainly. Queer communities, LGBTQ plus people, trans people, gender nonconforming people, people who were told by their families and their churches that the only love available was conditional on their disappearance. These people, us, right? We've been building chosen family since long before the church decided we deserved our dignity. We know what it means to construct home with intention, not inherited, constructed. Through loyalty instead of blood, through chosen commitment instead of biological accident. We know what it means to build a table in the exact spot where someone else built a wall. Because when your family of origin makes love conditional on your vanishing, when your church that baptized you tells you to edit yourself before returning, you have to learn quickly. You learn that family can mean something different, that it can be built from scratch, that it can be held together by truth and tenderness, and the kind of loyalty that comes from surviving something together. Marcella Althaus Reed, right, this Argentinian theologian, wrote a really great book, right? You should look it up. It's called Indecent Theology. She wrote that and meant every word of it, right? Althaus Reed argued that the holy thing often happens outside the approved structures, in the margins, among the people the institution already wrote off. They go on to say the church doesn't need to rescue queer communities. The church needs to pull up a chair, go quiet, and learn. Learn about how family is formed through truth and shared survival, through the specific wisdom that necessity teaches and privilege will never teach. That wisdom is holy. It's hard fought, and it belongs in every room where the church is trying to figure out what genuine community actually looks like. So we've been talking here for a while. I want to bring this to somewhere practical for you because I don't want you to leave with beautiful language and no direction, right? It's cool to be able to talk about these things, but we need to do something, right? If there's no practical direction, that's not a podcast, that's not a conversation we're having, that's just a vibe. The first thing I want to ask you to do, maybe this week or you can spread it out, but notice where independence in your life has become an idol, not a virtue, but something you're actually worshiping because it keeps you from having to trust anyone. Philosopher Paul Ricoeur wrote about the hard labor of understanding why we see the world the way we do, right? How interpretive frameworks we carry shape everything without our awareness. And friend, I'm asking you to do a small version of that labor. Just ask yourself honestly, who taught me that asking for help was so dangerous? When did I decide that needing people was a weakness? And that a person's that person's experience still worth obeying? Is that person's experience still worth obeying today? Because you might be living under a rule that was written by a wound that has long since needed to be revisited. And look at who's benefiting from you feeling this way. Who's benefiting from this framework that's been taught to you? The second thing is to get out there and actually do this. Practice one act of mutuality, not charity, mutuality. I want to be specific what that might actually look like because I think we can let these things stay abstract as a way of never actually having to do them. Maybe you ask for something. Say the words out loud. I need help with this, right? Those words will feel enormous, but say them anyway. Or offer something to someone, not from your surplus, but from your presence, your time, your attention, your witness. Maybe you can tell a person, a real person, right? The truth about something that's actually hard right now. Not the edited version, not the one that you think they want to hear, but the true one. And the third thing is to build a smaller table. I know that sounds antithetical to who we are, but go with me. Not a program, not a curriculum, not an app, not a growth strategy. You need 2 or 3 people who know your real name, the one you use when you stop performing, the one that goes with the version of you that shows up at 2 in the morning when everything's falling apart. 2 or 3 people, that's all you need, who notice when you go quiet and ask the follow-up question and aren't satisfied with those terrible words, I'm fine. Find those people. Or heck, become that person for someone else. Best case scenario, both. That will change your life. I've watched it happen. That changes people's lives. So before I close, I need to say something directly to the people who've been hurt by community, especially religious community. Not just the disappointed or let down, but the genuinely hurt. Friend, the church that outed you, the small group that gossiped about your marriage, the community that rallied around protecting the institution and the person in power instead of protecting you, the leader who used spiritual authority as a weapon, the people who prayed for you and made you feel like a project instead of a person. If any of those sound like you, I'm not going to rush you towards trust. There's no 5-step plan for healing that I can hand you. I just want to say your caution makes sense. Your hesitancy makes sense. The early church in Acts was not perfect people instantly loving each other perfectly. It was ordinary, messy, sometimes failing people practicing a new way badly and slowly and imperfectly and staying at it anyway. There's this letter to the church in Corinth, right? And it's a deeply dysfunctional community there, full of arguments and factions, people suing each other, people arguing over who's the best preacher and which one they want to follow. There's even someone having an affair with his stepmother. So those Corinthians, right? Those crazy Corinthians, Paul still calls them the body of Christ. And it's not because they've arrived, it's not because they figured it out, but it's because they're still practicing. The mystic Howard Thurman, the man whose spiritual vision set so many things in motion, wrote about what he called the sound of the genuine in every person. The real self, the true self, the one that has been waiting. Sometimes it's been waiting for a really long time, for a space finally safe enough to emerge. Friend, your genuine self is still in there, and you are allowed to reveal them and to heal at whatever human speed you need. Let me tell you what I actually think the gospel is. Not just that souls are saved. The gospel is strangers becoming kin. The gospel is lonely people finding a table where they're welcomed. The gospel is that nobody has to carry everything all by themselves. The gospel, the good news is that the walls we built to survive do not have to be the walls we die inside of. Desmond Tutu gave us the concept of Ubuntu, a South African philosophical and theological vision that says at its core, I am because we are. Not I exist, therefore I matter. We exist. And in that we, I discover myself. You see, my humanity is not separable from yours, friend. Your flourishing is not optional to mine. When you fall through the cracks, something in me falls through the cracks with you. When you find your way back to the table, the whole table is warmer. That is the vision of Acts 2. That is what the Spirit births. That is the community formed around a God who runs towards people instead of away from them. Now, listen, I'm not asking you today to have it all figured out or to be able to trust perfectly or to drop your guard immediately. Or for Pete's sake, like to pretend that your wounds aren't real. What I am asking, what I think the Holy Spirit is asking of you, is to keep practicing, to find the one person to tell one truth to eat one meal with people, to ask for one thing that you need, to offer one act of real presence, and then do it again and again and again until that practice becomes life, until the life that you're practicing becomes community, and until the community becomes the thing that the world is desperate for and doesn't quite know how to name. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for listening to this episode. And if this episode found you somewhere real, share it with someone who might need it, not as a pitch, just as a quiet, hey, you're not alone in this. You can find us at missiongathering.com All the links are in the show notes. And this week, if you can, just try one thing. Ask for something. Offer something. Tell the truth to one person. See what happens as we rise up together.